You know, it's been a couple of years, but I think I finally figured out how to get this NIL thing under control. It's extreme, but it'll work.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. More importantly, Ole Miss every day. And this is an issue that affects Ole Miss mightily, and that is the NIL space. Anyway, hi, I'm Stephen Willis. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. As we are working towards media days, we're going to do a show today about NIL and what is going on with NIL in that space, because it's getting convoluted and more convoluted by the day. The goal from some people seems to be to make this so convoluted and to tangle these webs up so much that it is unable to get untangled, to where you're kind of stuck in this corrupt system that is essentially broken, that benefits about 4 or 5 schools. That's what it feels like from time to time. But I do think that it is starting to change. And we'll get straight into it. Recently, the Athletic and USA Today and all those have been doing stories about what was been going on with NIL and how they were using it to make their collectives more effective, okay? So the NCAA sets up a confrontation with state lawmakers concerning NIL guidelines. Several states, including Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, have recently passed laws that conflict with NCAA rules, including those related to schools' interactions with collectives, booster and business-driven organizations that have formed a pool of resources for NIL opportunities for athletes at various schools and can be promoted in limited ways by the schools. However, in a letter to Division I schools obtained by USA Today Sports, the NCAA says if state law permits a certain institutional action and NCAA legislation prohibits the same action, institutions must follow the rules. Now, my opinion on that is, duh. The government does not have a right to put guidelines and rules on a private organization. And since the NCAA is a voluntary membership organization, Texas A&M and Texas and Oklahoma and Arkansas and all those schools have voted for the current rules in place. And they are voluntarily allowing themselves to be governed by that. But now in this collective age, you have boosters that are trying to eliminate and shield themselves for what may or may not happen in the future and make it to where the NCAA cannot come after them, according to state law, even though it is completely bogus. And we're going to have my solution to this NIL problem in the second segment. And we're going to talk about how NIL is becoming big business in the third segment. But they're setting this up intentionally because they're preparing themselves to just free-for-all. They think now that because it's free-for-all, we need to put ourselves in the best situation for a free-for-all. But the NCAA is starting to wind this in a little bit. And in a lot of ways, this is the 80s all over again. When SMU got in trouble and the death penalty happened, it was in an environment similar to this. And I do think we're heading down that road again. I'll give you my takes of exactly how we can combat this. All right. Some of the new state laws include languages that aim to specifically prohibit the NCAA from taking action against schools that follow the state law, but brings it into potential violation with NCAA rules. These provisions, among other actions by states, are driving the NCAA and many of its member schools and conferences to rigorously lobby members of Congress to pass federal legislation that would create national rules for sports NIL. NCAA President Charlie Baker recently alluded to such situation as an appearance at a conference in Washington sponsored by the University of Arizona titled The Future of College Sports. Baker said these states say, screw the NCAA, screw the conference, screw the rules. So this is the environment that we are in right now. There are people wanted to vilify the NCAA for years. Okay, and they have. The NCAA has been the boogeyman. Everything that is wrong, the NCAA takes the bullet, and that part of that is their job. But the reason that the SEC and the Big Ten, and there's never going to be a breakaway, is because the SEC and the Big Ten doesn't want to be the boogeyman. They need the boogeyman. They don't want to pay the extra money. They just want to make money off what they're doing, and they want to be able to point to the NCAA and say, hey, that's broken. But the problem that the SEC and the Big Ten and everybody else is seeing right now is they've done it for so long, people are actively thinking they're in conflict with the NCAA. The NCAA, I have issues with. With the whole situation with Ole Miss 10 years ago, I have problems with everything that went on with that. With what just happened with LSU, I have problems with it, especially when you look at Mark Emmert's like nephew or son-in-law or something like that being the ADD, Scott Woodward, at LSU. I have issues with that. I do think the NCAA is a corrupt organization, but it is less corrupt than this NIL space that we're in now. And the NCAA is going to have to take steps, severe steps, to get this back in line. And we will explain this in the second segment because people are going to think it's harsh, and people are going to say, hey, this cannot happen because of what it will mean. But I do think what it will mean will prevent it from actually happening. It's almost like a mutual assured destruction type situation. And that is going to eliminate tampering and also have another idea of what they're pushing right now in reforms that can eliminate all the essentially price gouging a little bit that is going on in college sports. Both of those issues that everybody would agree needs to be taken care of. These are really easy steps where it can actually happen, and it doesn't affect player movement. It doesn't affect player compensation. Doesn't affect anything. The only people that it really affects are these rogue boosters that are kind of trying to take hold right now. So when you look at what's going on in the NIL environment in college football right now, it's scary. It is a free-for-all. Everybody is absolutely nervous about what's going on. And this is the other thing you need to remember. The schools that it is the impetus for the NCAA to do something about it is about 6. That's it. Everybody else will play ball. Heck, most of the NCAA governing body are Division III, I think. But 6 schools are schools that have to get in line. And if they do this, and you eliminate the tampering aspect of NIL recruitment and transfer portal recruitment, if you eliminate the prices being risen, the inflation that's been going up year to year, if you eliminate those 3 things, you have a chance for a semblance of college football to stabilize and normalize as well. It should be really interesting. We'll talk about that in the next segment, but right now I do want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get on the action than FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. Yes, I do realize that Mississippi is a brick-and-mortar casino state. Absolutely. But if you are in Louisiana or in Tennessee, you can take advantage of the FanDuel Sportsbook app. If you go to Memphis, Nashville, if you're down in Baton Rouge, if you're getting set up for the Tulane game, I think maybe if you sign up now, that no sweat first bet will be available for you when you cross the border in September. So check that out, I do believe. So don't miss out on your chance to snag a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, it's an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Trademarks used with permission. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Every dayers, we have good stuff coming in the next couple of days. Got Tom Vanderford, we got Derek Vandegrift. I'm probably going to have another video up as well, and then we'll get into our weekday Locked On Ole Miss podcast. I'm getting ready to go see Indiana Jones tonight. Pretty fired up about that. You can see the envelope back there. That is my Grail diary. It came in just in time for the movie. So this is how I would handle the NIL situation now. And it is a complicated issue. And what has happened is people have said the NCAA is toothless for so long that people have started to believe it. And they also think that state law is going to supersede private organizations, which is another weird thing. But in order to shield these rogue boosters and cheaters, for instance, the collective and the foundation of Texas A&M on July 1st, I think, is getting ready to essentially merge. They might be separate, but they're not separate, to where you can get loyalty points and all that for donating to NIL. And all of these perks that they're not allowed to give, all of these are spelled out by the recent memo that the NCAA has put out saying you can't do it. A&M, middle fingers in the air, we're doing it anyway. And they think they're protected by Texas state law because of these laws we told you about in the first segment. And almost every other school in NCAA is against this. Now, schools like Ole Miss, schools like Mississippi State, schools like Tennessee, Georgia, they're all watching this because if the NCAA does nothing about it, these Southeastern Conference collectives are absolutely going to have to follow along and follow suit, or they're going to get killed. So they're counting on the NCAA to show some teeth. And the one thing that the NCAA is always going to have control over is two things. One, the eligibility of a player. They will always have that in their back pocket. That is always a bullet that's going to be in their gun. If a player does something crazy, if they violate gambling rules, for instance, that eligibility comes into questions, boom, it's gone. That isn't anything about players. That's just saying, hey, there are rules in place for players. The one thing that they can control, and there's nothing that schools can do, is they control the membership. It is a voluntary organization. And they control that if you do not want to play ball, you can walk. And because of that, I think it's important that the NCAA, it is time to bring back the death penalty. This SMU story, everybody's seen Pony Express, the 30 for 30 on ESPN+, but it is time absolutely to bring back the death penalty. This was a period in the 80s that is real similar to the Wild West field that is now. SMU completely flaunted the NCAA and forced the NCAA into this. Everybody said the death penalty will never be used again because what it did to SMU, but I think that is changing with how college football has changed in the last 5-6 years. In order to rein this in and get this under control, one school is going to have to go down for this, and it's probably going to have to be a major type school. Now, this is what I would do, okay? And before I get started on this, I want to talk about this is for major violations like tampering, stuff like that, that going outside the rule, kind of intertwining a black market with the current NIL market to get a player that is in Colorado that hasn't entered the portal, to get him to your school with an offer of money. That is what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about like paperwork snafus and normal level 2 and level 3 violations. I'm talking about serious violations. But if you look at, this is how we will fix it. When a school commits it the first time, they are suspended from athletic abilities for 1 year in the offending sport. If Texas A&M tampers in football, if Texas A&M uses their booster network to come together to coalesce like they're doing right now, they are suspended from playing football for 1 year. Period. First offense, no appeal, nothing, boom, done. The second time it happens, and I don't think we should put years in statute of limitations unless it's 10, 15 years at a time. All athletics are suspended for a year. That means if Texas A&M does it again, they cannot play any sports for 1 year. They take forfeits and L's in all those sports. If the conference is going to have to deal with it, just is what it is. And the third violation, NCAA membership is revoked. There is no more Texas A&M in the NCAA. There's no coming back. There's no anything. And if you want to start your own NCAA version of the NCAA, have at it. You can do that just as well. Voluntary membership means you choose to be here. But by choosing to be a part of it, you're choosing to follow its rules. If you don't and you're willing to flaunt that, you open yourself up for these. This is the avenues to which the NCAA can deal with things like tampering and that side of the ugliness of the transfer portal and NIL. Remember, I am not advocating anybody with freedom of movement, and I am not advocating taking away $1 from players in NIL. What I am advocating and getting rid of is all the tampering and things that are going on. Now, the exorbitant prices that we talked about, this is how I think we should get rid of it. This is how we can. And the NCAA is working to do it. And they are going to make it to where if you sign somebody for a contract, it cannot be location-based or school-based, where if Johnny goes to your school, he can make this money, but if he transfers, you forfeit it. We can forfeit the contract. That money is going to follow him to school B, which means schools are going to be less likely to offer large sums of money and long contracts as well. Those two steps can ring in NIL and transfer portal, everything that's going on, and then all of a sudden we have a nice equitable situation within college football. Transfer portal tampering goes down, the money goes down a little bit, it becomes quite equitable, a salary cap without a salary cap emerges, that kind of stuff starts to happen. And I think if the NCAA can do that, if they will do that, and they're willing to put the teeth out there with those death penalty tunes, they have a chance to make this work pretty well. Now, let me know in the comments what you think about that, because that's controversial. I don't care what anybody says. I'm talking about if you mess up with a serious violation, it's not probation, it's expulsion for a year. If you mess up again, other sports pay for what the football boosters did. And if you mess up again, you're gone. 3 strikes and you're out. Just like in the real world, if you want to make state law become a thing, 3 strikes and you're out is a real ordeal. Similar to what SMU did in the 80s, as far as flaunting their nose at the NCAA, this is a way that the NCAA enforcement can get a little teeth. And there's probably going to be lawsuits, but honestly, if you sue and anybody sues the NCAA on your behalf, automatic expulsion as well. Because my theory is the desire to see your chosen team play is more than the desire to cheat to get their team over the top. If you do that, it's severe punishment. I realize that, and I realize all the areas that it could hurt. But also, I think that peer pressure is going to cause massive self-policing, and is going to cause the school to do whatever because they want that revenue to come in. They need that revenue to come in. So they're not going to risk this to where, like a Jaden Rashad at a Florida type situation won't happen. $8 million quarterbacks will not happen, because that money could follow them to Arizona State when he leaves. And tampering at the school, your roster, you'll be able to take a little bit of a breath. As the transfer portal, as it gets shorter and all of this stuff and it coalesces, the market starts to kind of shrink and become normal. Anyway, when we come back, we'll talk about how NIL is becoming big business in America these days. And that is the reason I don't think much change is going to actually happen, because it has become big business. Anyway, stick around. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. More like Ole Miss every day. And what we're talking about today is the current NIL market with my ideas for fixing it. And I mean, if you truly want to fix it, you can. But so many people are looking towards Congress. It's like they need to do something. They need to make this uniform. They need to do all that. No, they don't. They need to make it to where the NCAA is kind of the voice above voices, but the government doesn't really have any right to tell a private business how to do business. We don't do that. That's not this country. And NIL is becoming majorly big business in this country. There's consultant groups and summit groups and things like that that are popping all over. I just did a search on Google and this was the first 3 things that popped up. You have this NIL summit that happened June 3rd through 5th for people to educate themselves. Don't make no mistake, that's a way to make money outside of NIL on NIL. You look at the NIL source, your home for name, image, and likeness opportunities, and then Parks NIL Consulting. These are all things that were basically Google searches that immediately came up. And you have companies like On3, which On3 looks like a recruiting service. On3 looks like Rivals, and it looks like 247 because it was created by the same person that created those. But On3 is an NIL company. Their design, they want to control that marketplace as much as they can. They've held NIL summits on their own. They're constantly talking about NIL because they know where that goes. And they're going to constantly lobby against some kind of changes in the NIL space. Why? Because they want to be in a position to be the NIL experts within college sports. Smart move by Shannon Terry and On3 to do it, but I don't know if they can be trusted as a source in regulation of NIL because it goes against their interests. It's the same thing that they also did with, I guess it was Hayes Fawcett or something. If you can control the graphics and somebody gets to you to make the graphic for them, if you make it to where recruits come to you to get graphics made, you're going to find out 3 or 4 days early where that kid is going to commit. It's actually a pretty smart business model when you think about it. But On3 joins all of those others that we just talked about as essentially being an NIL company. You can see it on their profile pages. You can see just about everything has essentially a made-up NIL value. Why? Because they can corner the marketplace on what's going on. They can use that. If that becomes a benchmark, if it becomes like PFF ratings, even I use PFF ratings now, but if it becomes like that and they become the expert for it, that is a win for Shannon Terry and On3 Sports. So just pay attention to when that's going on because it's major league business. And because of that, and people are lobbying against change, and whether you know it or not, they might talk out of one corner of their mouth, this is a problem, but out of the other corner of their mouth, they're like, okay, we're making money doing this. We need to find a way to kick the can down the road and make money doing this as much as possible. I don't know what that does for the long-term health of college athletics in the United States of America. I don't know what that does. But I do know something needs to be done, and most people know that something needs to be done. And now that they've developed lobbyists, essentially, at the point where it is completely players' rights on everything because they want the NIL market to go completely one direction. It's all a PR thing to where any pushback against anything NIL, you see the uproar that happens. Under my model that I gave in segment 2, not a penny will be limited on college athletes. Not a second of movement will be limited on college athletes. It'll make it to where it's more equitable for colleges to compete because we're down with parity in our sports in this country. See the NFL, see the MLB, see all the sports over here. It's not like European soccer. The only one it's going to affect are rogue boosters that seek to circumvent the law for their own benefit, and now they're using state laws to shield their activities. Now, make no mistake, we're at a dangerous point right now. If this continues much further, it will be the death knell of NCAA athletics in this country. If you like basketball, if you like women's basketball, if you like college baseball, those sports will go away. So we need to be careful, and I do think the way to do this, and I will put it up one more time, this is what I would do for major violations, especially tampering. In the NFL and NBA, if you get caught tampering, you lose a draft pick. They can't do this because there's not that many people and it becomes a headache. But in the NCAA and FBS, there's 140 teams. So what I would do, if you get caught majorly tampering, your first thing, you get a suspension of athletic activities for 1 year in the offending sport. For the second violation, all athletics will be suspended for the year. And the third violation, your membership to the NCAA will be revoked. Those are the three ways I would handle major violations in NIL from the NCAA. Make an example of someone. And I think that, like I said before, seeing their team play is more important than cheating to see their team win for these people. So what will happen once you do this and everybody kind of gets scared straight is the peer pressure to play in the rules and self-police will be so much that none of these will happen. But we have to get to that place first. The NCAA has to have some real teeth, and this is the way to do it. They can always control eligibility of players. They can always control membership of a school. I think this needs to happen. I think the death penalty essentially needs to be brought back. And if you do that, you will see everything start to normalize in college athletics. Anyway, I hope everybody has a good weekend. Thank you very much for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. For your second listen, hook up Locked On SEC with a listen. Chris Gordy does a fantastic job all around the conference, and also my other channel, SEC After Dark. And SEC After Dark, the live stream was Wednesday night. We do that every Wednesday at 9 Eastern, 8 Central. Doing pretty well. It's presented by Dead Soxy. So check that out as well. I hope everybody has a great weekend. We're going to let this marinate. I don't know how it will do, but I think it needed to be said. So we will see you a little bit later. Hotty toddy.